Hello everybody, welcome back to Identity Snatchers audiobook. This is Identity Snatchers intro part 2. In part 1 we finished off what is UBF, and in part 2 we're going to continue on from the mixed bag of opinions until the end of the intro. The mixed bag of opinions. Apart from the self-published hagiographies produced on ubf.org and a few UBF-sponsored books, there is almost no documentation about this group. This is intentional. UBF has made significant effort to control exactly what is said about them and by whom. For example, UBF leaders took legal action in 2007 to remove a former member's website in Germany because the leaders deemed the website too negative. My claims in this book are drawn from 3 sources: my own experience from being both in and out of the group, the vast amount of former member testimonies publicly available on the internet, and UBF's own material and presentations. My personal story of my 24 years inside this group is articulated in detail in my previous 3 books. Now that I have processed my personal story, I'm free to look back and observe the principles and ideologies that had infiltrated my life. I have been outside the group for 4 years now. I have had hundreds of interactions with former members through in-person meetings, massive quantities of emails, and hours of phone calls. In this book, I also draw on the diverse experience reported by hundreds of former members. There are too many stories to tell, in fact. So I created an online companion to this book, restunleashed.org. On that website, I post links and documents from numerous former member sources. Such material bears witness to the narratives in this book. My interactions with former members is not just from reading their testimonies. I have also taken on the self-appointed role of exit counselor so that people both in and out of the group have a person to talk to, especially when they feel like leaving the group. I have personally spoken to many former members who expressed topics that would never be discussed in a UBF-led meeting. A large part of my inspiration for writing this book is drawn from the stories of 32 people who contacted me in 2014 and 2015 for help processing their UBF lifestyle. Most of them have asked to remain anonymous. In addition to my own experiences and former member experiences from the last 3 decades, I find a treasure trove of knowledge about UBF in their own Sunday message material and conference presentations. One of the best ways to expose the group is merely to point out the flaws and contradictions in their own material. As a UBF trained Sunday messenger, I am intimately familiar with these lectures. I can discern the ideologies woven into the philosophical fabric that guides the UBF mindset. I understand this mindset especially well because for many years I was quote-unquote Mr. UBF and defended UBF ideas and principles profusely on the internet. When I was still a member of UBF, I helped start the website called ubfriends.org, where we have discussed hundreds of UBF topics in over 19,000 comments and more than 600 published articles. All this puts me in a unique position to explain, examine, and expose the group. Surely there have been good things done by the group. I do not deny the genuine spiritual awakening that took place while at the group. I do not deny the stories of the individuals at the group who are indeed working to change the ministry for the better. But that is not the focus of this book. Any good that came out of UBF for many of us former members is tainted with the cultic control of our identities. Anything good we experience is poisoned with fear. Our genuine spiritual growth is stained pain, and our adult formative years are stunted with the bastardization of our cultural and generational identity. UBF is a mixed bag. That is a theme repeated by outside observers. Why is this? The main reason may have a lot to do with the founders. Any organization or group of people has a tendency to take on the character of those who founded the group. To understand the UBF organization, it is essential to know the character of Samuel Chang-Woo Lee and Sarah Berry. Much can be said, but for now I will share my personal interaction with both of them. Some thoughts on the late Samuel Chang-Woo Lee. I was 23 years old. I had been selected by my university to participate in a foreign exchange program in Russia, where I would study a 6-week language course. At the time, in 1992, the UBF organization was hyper-psyched for Russia. There was a man who sang Russian songs. We ate Russian bread, Russian salad dressing, and danced Russian dances every Christmas. Anything about Russia was fascinating to us. It was, of course, because our leader, Samuel Lee, had been praying for sending UBF missionaries to Russia for many years. He had made the bold claim that his visits to Russia and our prayers were the reason that communism fell in Russia. This quote from a UBF report published on October 9th, 1991 is just one example of the obsession with Russia that consumes us. Quote, in Chicago, with our weak faith and weaker vision, it was even harder to remember to pray for Russia. One man offered quote-unquote Moscow nights, singing each Sunday, Russian dancing developed by 2 women, Russian bread every Friday night, and journeys to Russia by a senior. Then, junior missionaries helped us to remember to pray for Russia. At the time, the Iron Curtain was very solid, but God is faithful. He accepted our prayer journeys, our Russian dancing, and eating Russian bread, and raised up Brother Gorbachev, the present-day Cyrus, to open the doors of Russia earlier than we asked. End quote. UBF World Mission History, page 16. This delusional idea that UBF was the reason for Russia's changes was exciting to me. I still had not processed my father's premature death and was looking for a greater purpose for my life. I found that purpose in Samuel Lee's maniac ideas about Russia. And so I decided to use my university trip, quote unquote, for the glory of God. I asked to be a short-term missionary, UBF missionary to Russia. This meant I would meet Samuel Lee in Chicago for his approval before I would be allowed to do such a thing. Meeting Samuel Lee in person in his office at Chicago was a fearful event. He put me at ease, however, and we prayed together. He ordered someone to make a photocopy of an encyclopedia article about Russia and told me to read it on the airplane. Then he told me something that ignited fear in me again. He said if I wanted to be considered a short-term missionary, I must go to Russia and stay there until the Moscow Bible Conference. This was a problem since my university course ended a full 2 weeks before the conference. Out of fear, however, I obeyed. In fact, I ended up bribing the KGB to extend my visa for those 2 weeks. This meeting with Lee is a glimpse into how everything works at UBF, even in Lee's absence. I really enjoyed the trip to Russia. I truly did become inspired to be a Christian missionary to Russia. Yet all these good things are tainted with fear. Before his death in 2002, I had only a few other encounters with Samuel Lee. He came to our arranged wedding. He gave announcements at conferences, and I would see him when I drove missionaries from Toledo to the Chicago airport. Always the impression I got was fear. Here are some words I heard him say that stick in my mind. Quote, I will shoot you with my gun if you don't write your testimony. End quote. No breakfast for the choir. Quote unquote. Quote, our UBF missionaries are so narrow-minded. End quote. Lee told many kinds of horror stories in his lectures. Those close to him knew he was exaggerating or making the stories up. But to us who did not know him so closely, the stories invoked terror. My point here is not to paint Samuel Lee only as a fearmonger. He was a father and a husband and a leader. He did many good things and implanted a love for God and the Bible in many people. My point is that Lee's life work, the UBF ministry, is tainted with fear. It is intriguing to recognize the bitter irony of Lee's fate. He often instilled fear into us members, fears of being killed in an accident if we ever left the ministry. But it is Lee himself who rejected any kind of reform of UBF and who claimed in 2001 that God will punish him if he did anything wrong, who died 1 year later in a horrible accident. Some perspectives on Sarah Berry. Cracked. The hard-boiled egg smacked against Sarah's forehead. Seeing our surprised faces, she explained that as a Southerner, that is how she breaks open a hard-boiled egg. My friend and I were eating breakfast with Sarah Berry after taking some Korean missionaries back to Chicago for their flight home. I was still in college and fascinated by the UBF promises of making my name great. I felt like a Secret Service agent delivering foreign dignitaries and dining with the Queen of England. Many years later, I would be working with Sarah and her team of people in Chicago UBF to delete negative material about the group from the internet. She would give me suggestions for the Wikipedia article about UBF. I would then post her edits to the website. I did this because I was desperately trying to defend the UBF organization, hoping to find affirmation and justification for spending my entire adult formative years for the group's mission. For the most part, Sarah Berry teaches a form of Christianity that is simplistic but largely in line with conservative evangelical Christianity in America. Perhaps her teachings line up better with Christian fundamentalism found in America in the 1960s. If there's any Christianity at UBF, I say it is because of Berry's writings. It may be surprising then to realize that the problems facing the UBF organization are largely Sarah's own doing. She knows what has happened in her organization, but does not speak out. So while I have little to criticize in regards to Sarah Berry's words, I find many disconnections and contradictions when it comes to Sarah Berry's actions. When my wife and I met Sarah for over 6 hours in Toledo in 2011, she seemed to understand the problems we were sharing. At one point, when we explained the bad influence of one person, she said sternly, "Someone should tell that man to shut up." I told her that most people were too afraid to do that. Near the end of the meeting, she concluded, quote, "I see the problems, but what can I do? I have no authority. Let's pray," end quote. As the only living founder of the ministry, there is much Sarah Berry could do. With just a few phone calls or emails, she could initiate wide-scale change in the group. In fact, since UBF people call her Mother Berry, her influence and authority carry far more weight than she indicated. I believe she knows this, but for some reason will not use her authority to spark real change. Perhaps she sees the writing on the wall. The UBF 50th anniversary celebration lectures show a clear trend of writing Sarah Berry herself out of the ministry history. Credit is being given to the late Samuel Lee in those writings. Perhaps she is content with letting the Koreans take over the ministry. Here are some perspectives about Sarah from foreign members. I share these not to paint her as solely a bad leader, but to share the side of her that most people will never know. This is the side of Sarah that UBF members are afraid to talk about. I share these things as a reality check, and I share them in an ironic obedience to Sarah Berry's own long-standing prayer for UBF people to be quote-unquote salt and light and people of integrity. Here is an account of how Sarah Berry handled a known case of adultery committed by a woman in the ministry. Quote, "When she learned of the adultery committed by a woman in the ministry, my friend was shocked and very hurt since the woman was her own Bible teacher and close friend of many years. My friend said she didn't believe it and asked me not to tell anyone that she knew about it. Later, after talking to a senior leader about it, he said he would ask Sarah Berry's advice. Sarah Berry told the senior leader they have to support the woman as the spiritual elder and stand on her side. The senior leader informed me Sarah Berry said we all have to say we didn't believe it. The senior leader told me to tell my Bible student never to talk about the adultery again. However, through personally talking to the man, this senior leader knew for sure the adultery was true. The senior leader told me even though he knew it occurred, he said he had to obey Sarah Berry and say it didn't happen, end quote. Anonymous former Chicago UBF member. Those near Sarah Berry were prone to develop an unhealthy codependent relationship with her. Quote, personally, I also began to feel a bondage in my mind and soul which was not from Jesus. As I, quote-unquote, rose in rank, co-working with another leader in heading the University of Chicago ministry, my dependence on Sarah Berry, on my Bible teacher, and on Samuel Lee also grew. Now, instead of looking to the Holy Spirit for words during my Bible studies, I was getting them from my Bible teacher. I became afraid to search the Holy Spirit's leading for myself because of the number of times that it happened different from hers. As a leader, I also knew that my life and ministry were being watched by Samuel Lee, and I find myself living before him more and more. His and Sarah Berry's opinions became the standard by which I judged whether something was spiritual or not. If they approve of it, I regarded it as spiritual, even if it went against the Word of God. If they did not regard it as spiritual, it was not. In nearly every area of my life, they had become my standard, for I thought about their lives more than I thought about Jesus' life. End quote. Anonymous former Chicago UBF member. Here is a strongly worded perspective of Sarah Berry from a Korean man in 2005 who was very close to her and Samuel Lee for many years. Quote, disregard and contempt for UBF victims from people like Sarah Berry and John June is to be expected. UBF is their life's work after all. You wouldn't expect them to admit things that would serve to tear down their creation. Plus, they're just plain cult leader types, having amply demonstrated their inverted morality and propping up someone who is just plain evil in words and deeds. You expect them to defend UBF with all their strength, blame the victims, twist the scriptures, lie, all with a 6 mile, end quote. Anonymous former member. External observations by Ron Enroth, news reports, and John H. Armstrong. Outside observations about the group are rare since the leaders intend to keep a low profile, wanting as little publicity as possible. Even so, there are some public interactions. Dr. Ronald Enroth's 1992 book, Churches That Abuse, contains a case study in Chapter 5 about UBF. Here is a quote from the book about Mr. Enroth. Quote, Enroth is a leading scholar and national resource on cults and cultism whose special perspectives are heartily welcomed by both the secular and the religious society. He is professor of sociology at Westmont College and the author of many books on cults and the new religions, including The Lure of the Cults and the New Religions and Evangelizing the Cults. End quote. Some may discount Enroth's observations about UBF, claiming the group has changed since 1992. However, I find his work stunningly accurate in 2015. Most insiders to the group will readily recognize Enroth's observations 23 years later. This long-standing validity of his work is a testament to the quality of his work. The abuses exposed in Enroth's book are often dismissed by the group. They claim that only Samuel Lee did such things and that such events only happened in the 1970s or 1980s. This is hypocritical because the group praises Lee so much. Is Lee to be praised or criticized? I write as a witness that not only are these events typical, they are currently happening in UBF chapters around the world. While it is true that Lee was often excessively brutal, the same methodology and ideology are in play today, often behind the scenes, hidden behind the ruse of Bible study. So while UBF leaders can no longer openly train students in today's world, they still wish to do so. One senior Korean missionary lamented to me in 2015 on social media, quote, somehow we used to be able to control students better in the past, end quote. Indeed, in the absence of worldwide instant communication, control was easier in the past. In addition to Enroth's book, there are some local television reporters who did brief investigations into some UBF chapters. This happened at UIC and Triton in Chicago. TV reports were also produced about UBF chapters in Toledo, Cincinnati, Columbus, the University of Maryland, and Winnipeg, Canada. Numerous newspapers, like the student newspaper at Johns Hopkins, have also run stories about UBF. The central question of these television reports and newspaper stories is this: is UBF a cult or just a devoted church group? The conclusion is always that UBF is a mixed bag. Some students love it, others despise it. Outsiders cannot explain this phenomenon, but as an insider, this mixed bag perspective makes a lot of sense. The new students who are being love bombed and who may be experiencing genuine Christian faith think UBF is wonderful. They do not yet see the problems and the covered up abuse. The leaders, of course, speak globally of how great UBF is. This is understandable because they have invested so much of their lives for the ministry. They often are the ones doing the cover-ups. This is a big reason I decided to write this book. I want everyone, both insiders and outsiders, to understand what has been going on and what UBF is currently doing. The simple answers are contradictory and do not satisfy me, so I have done extensive research and analysis to find answers. As of 2015, these are the groups with files of information about UBF that I am aware of: the New England Institute of Religious Research, the Concerned Group of Newly Emerged Religions in China, the Cult Information Services of Northeast Ohio, the Apologetics Resource Center, the Apologetics Index, the Cult Education Institute, and the Cult Commission of Germany. In addition, the now defunct CAN, Cult Awareness Network, had massive amounts of information collected about abuse at UBF. In fact, in my day, in the 1980s, was sometimes talked about the CAN deprogramming events at UBF. Many of these sources are noted in the 2004 petition to remove UBF from the National Association of Evangelicals in the United States. Furthermore, Moody Church in Chicago has many reports about UBF. Numerous former members have studied there. I would encourage you to seek out these groups and compare their notes with my claims in this book. The other major interaction between UBF and the outside world came when UBF leaders met John H. Armstrong, a Reformed minister, author, and founder of Act 3 Ministries, during their search for recommendation letters in the mid-2000s. He was teaching a class where a high-ranking UBF director happened to be a student at Wheaton College. This is ironic because UBF leaders traditionally have preached against such seminary studies, labeling systematic theology as quote-unquote godless chatter. And yet, because of this one class taken by an American shepherd leader, UBF may be forever changed. John Armstrong's influence on UBF has been impactful, to say the least. I commend John for his work with UBF and count John among my personal friends. John has extensive interactions with me and with the group. John Armstrong was asked to be a kind of mediator and temporarily joined the newly formed UBF Ethics and Accountability Committee. However, John came to UBF with the primary purpose of preaching the Christian gospel. This was highly encouraging to some of us UBF leaders who have been interacting with John on his blog. When John joined the Ethnic and Accountability Committee around 2011, the UBF leaders were becoming exasperated from a flood of reports of all kinds of problems, including allegations of sexual abuse and an alleged affair by a senior UBF missionary. The committee investigated things, but as a former member, I know little about the results. I did, however, come to know John quite well. Unfortunately, Most of John's excellent Christian counseling was not welcomed by many hardliner leaders. In spite of this, John's words and friendship were instrumental in opening my eyes to see the unhealthy environment around me at UBF. At first, John gave UBF a glowingly recommendation letter in June of 2007. Later, after years of working with UBF, John recommended that I read the book The Kingdom of Cults by Walter Martin in order to help understand what happened to me at UBF. Those who are members of UBF and those outsiders observing UBF may have a difficult time seeing the cultic elements I shared in this book. There's much holy paint covering up the cult lifestyle all UBF members are familiar with. So while I admit that labeling UBF as a Korean Bible cult is difficult to understand or accept when looking at the ministry from the outside, the cultic elements are very much enforced in today's UBF. When you look at the ministry of UBF from the outside, you are looking at what the leaders want you to see. When you examine the life of former members, you see the psychological fallout from the painful exit process, and then you can begin to see the reasons for the cult label. In fact, what has helped me the most to understand what happened to me at UBF has been listening to former members. It is said that a former member knows more about a group than current members. I found this to be true. A mother's letter. Perhaps the best way to introduce outsiders to the group is by presenting letters from parents and family members. What follows is one of many such letters. This letter is from a mother in 1991 whose daughter was participating at UBF as a sheep in Germany. This letter has been translated from German and shared here without changes, and with the explicit permission of the German Protestant Center, EZW. Many more such letters may be obtained by contacting the cult watching organizations I referred to earlier. Our daughter, a student, had got in contact with the UBF through a meeting with a friend, and she was a supporter of the UBF group in Cologne for any length of time. I would like to introduce our daughter briefly. Having become a believer as a child, she was active in the Christian youth ministry since then. She had contact to the Protestant city mission at home. She went to the campus crusade for Christ during her studies with friends. She became acquainted with a female student on a quote-unquote crusade summer conference. This student told her about a Korean Christian group calling itself University Bible Fellowship, UBF. Our daughter accepted the invitation to join the group meeting. According to the reports, I consider these Koreans as being kind people. Our daughter was enthusiastic about the hospitality experience there, of the personal care, and of the way how the Bible was read in the group. She started with a one-to-one Bible study with her friend from UBF and later with a Korean in Cologne. She was completely fascinated by her prospect of being allowed to live her Christianity in this group. Our daughter used to report to me on both the quote-unquote crusade and later UBF. She invited me repeatedly to come for the events, but being a mother of an adult daughter, I was convinced that I should let her go quite safely on her own way. Never having dealt with cults before, I only became skeptical when our daughter said, "My friend continues her studies in Cologne from now on. UBF is her church, where she wants to live completely now." This girl lived from then on with a Korean family in Cologne who belonged to the UBF. Our daughter wanted to go to Cologne now too. At this time, I noticed an emotional change going on in her, which showed itself by her suddenly limiting the contact to us parents, seemingly being very nervous, restless, and irritated. She looked bad and only spoke about the Bible, about UBF, and about the mission of the world. After her decision to move to Cologne to attend UBF, I asked her to be allowed to come along with her one time. She consented, and I went on a study together with her and got to know the UBF group. To my astonishment, a Korean didn't leave my side anymore. On this day, from morning till evening, I had the feeling to be quote-unquote tailed. It was the advantage of this quote-unquote tailing that the young man thought to have entertained me. He told me about the stages of his life, about his tasks as a missionary at UBF, and about his studies, which are only necessary because he would get no resident permit and no job as Korean in Germany. He had completed a full vocational training in Korea, but being a missionary at UBF, he could live here in the Federal Republic only as a student. He told about the marriages within the group and about his own marriage with a group member. I have been feasted by different student family at noon and in evening. The hospitality was overwhelming for me at first too. I learned soon though that the hospitality was part of the program at UBF. They fed the guests like quote unquote children of a king. My permanent companion also told me how the situation of the own children of one family looked like. These parents had accommodated one of her children with foster parents in Germany and one of her children in Korea with a grandmother because they had to be available for the mission at UBF. With the other family, another female student lived together in the narrow, small apartment in the children's room of this family. As far as I am informed, she still lives there today. In connection with this, I suddenly remember a book of a woman who was a former Jehovah's Witness. She had written the book after she left the cult to warn others and protect them from joining it. I also went to the service of the UBF group in the Sunday afternoon and noticed that besides some young Germans, only young Koreans sat around next to me. The sermon of Abraham Lee and the prayers of his helpers confused me very much. The primitive word order and the superficial train of thought touched me strangely. I felt myself as if someone wanted to pull my leg. Besides that, the service was performed with much singing. As playing a part, UBF members who were introduced as quote-unquote sheep, quote-unquote prayer servants, and quote-unquote shepherds participated. The way I see it, the program was aligned with a special emotional experience. After the service, there were after meetings and also a kind of continuation of the service in prayer formed in little circles. The individual service participants have already made notes to themselves during the sermon. After my observations, this after meeting was merely a questioning of the thoughts the listeners had and represented an attempt to achieve an additional alignment of the individual persons to orient the thoughts of the sermon by praise and reproaches at the desired aims of this cult. I am still convinced today that the young people present didn't see through the skillful manipulation at all. The personal care that UBF prospects received by one-on-one Bible study continues, in my opinion, in the service so that in UBF no one stays without address. Nobody lives anonymously in this group. You know the names of each other and address one another with the trusting informal German pronoun du. I can understand that this very friendly atmosphere arouses spontaneous enthusiasm with young people who often suffer from contact poverty or find themselves having few contacts at the universities. I also think that our churches could learn something from UBF in this area. But the observations during the service, the conversation with the Koreans, the experiences in the UBF families, and the changes going on in the behavior of our daughter made me mistrustful and promote the thought that something couldn't be all right at UBF. Having arrived at home again, I tried to find interlocutors to learn something about UBF. I went to the city missionary, spoke on the phone to quote-unquote crusade, and was passed on from there to Idea and Wetzlar. I finally got addresses of the Protestant Student Mission in Marburg and some keywords which scared me came up. Brainwashing, personality change, mental manipulation. I was frightened up to the innermost part. Now I called with friends and acquaintances and asked for help. I finally learned something from the quote Church Commission for the Cults and Worldview Issues, end quote. I even got the address of a former member and learned exact details on the methods of UBF. The information of the other cult representatives were also interesting. One helped me along only after repeated requests. Others discouraged me. This was all very frustrating, but then I finally received written documents from which followed in my opinion that UBF has to be classified as a cult. After obstinate search and long telephone calls across Germany, many conversations with dear helpful people, I finally looked through the muddle of information. For me, UBF is a cult. To me, this group seems to quote-unquote track our religious youth at the universities. This young generation, which is in searching age, is open to all new and to many ideals. Nowadays, many young people find themselves faced with for much swindle and implausibility in state and politics. Some also are resigned and have only negative thoughts with respect to their own life. These searching people are the ideal contact person for cults, which want to acquire them for their shady missions, like formerly the Pied Piper of Hamelin did. The dangerousness of the UBF, in my opinion, is an attendant mutation of mind. It is achieved by a brainwashing method which is exercised by the one-on-one Bible studies, the practice of quote-unquote soul sharing, the writing of life testimonies and life confessions, and the re-education by praise and reproaches. After my insight, specific control also takes place from man to man or from woman to woman by telephone calls, letters, and visits. I gather from the reports of my daughter that there are also psychologically elaborated trainings at weekends which result in an intense manipulation. This appears to me almost like an attempt to perform an intellectual and spiritual incapacitation with the participants. I was alarmed by the, in my opinion, wrong assessment of UBF at many official places. I can understand that after a superficial first glance, the UBF members leave a good impression of their group. But after intensive occupation with the written material which is handed out by the UBF with the methods of this group and the reports of persons affected, a completely different picture arises. Our daughter has found out of this group again with the help of many people, professors, doctors, boyfriends, girlfriends, former religious teacher commissioners for cult problems and their documentation, city missionary, many who prayed for it, and many coincidental helpers. We see God's leadership and mercy there. We are grateful for it. We, however, see other parents whose adult children are not finding out. These people urgently need help. It also is all about to protect other young people from the step into this group. For this reason, I have written this report. End of the letter. Translated with permission from a letter by a mother published in their documentation Service 8, 1991, page 234 to 237 of the German Protestant Censor for Religious and Ideological Issues, EZW. And this concludes Identity Snatchers Introduction Part 2. Next time, Identity Snatchers Chapter 1, Staring at the Mirror. Until next time.